my fiancée said during a late evening walk in Istanbul. I feel like I haven't truly lived yet. I told her exploration should never be delayed, returned home alone, reorganized my entire future, and eventually, she realized some journeys permanently separate people. I feel like I haven't truly lived yet. She said it while looking at the Bosphorus, the water catching the last gold of the evening sun, her hair moving in the warm Istanbul breeze. She didn't look at me when she said it. That was the part that hit the hardest. Not the words themselves, though they were heavy enough, but the fact that she was staring at the horizon when she said them, like she was already somewhere else in her mind, already gone, and I was just the last remaining piece of a life she was quietly deciding to leave behind. We had been engaged for 11 months. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 31. She was 28. We had a venue booked, a date circled on the calendar, a deposit already paid to a florist whose name I now cannot say, without feeling something cold move through my chest. We were in Istanbul for 10 days, a pre-wedding trip, we had called it, a celebration of what was coming. That was the plan. I remember the exact cobblestones beneath my shoes when she said it. We were walking along the waterfront near Karakoy, the kind of evening that travel photographers dream about. Amber light, old buildings, ferries cutting slowly through the strait, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting from a cart somewhere behind us. It was the kind of moment you're supposed to hold someone's hand through. And I was holding hers. She pulled it away, gently, not dramatically, right before she spoke. I feel like I haven't truly lived yet. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I watched the ferries. I thought about the venue deposit. I thought about her mother, who had already bought her dress. I thought about my father, who had spent 3 weeks writing a toast he was so proud of that he read it to me over the phone, laughing softly at his own jokes. And then I thought, she is telling me something. And she has chosen this exact moment, this exact city, this exact view, to tell it. There's always a reason for the timing. What does that mean? I asked. It wasn't an aggressive question. It was a genuine one. She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't guilt, wasn't cruelty, wasn't even confusion. It was longing. Raw, restless longing. The kind of expression you see on people who are standing at a train station, watching a train they didn't board pull away from the platform. She paused. I feel like I went from university to a job to us, and I never had a moment that was just mine, you know? No chapter where I was completely accountable to no one. Where I could just go. Go where? I asked. She gestured vaguely at the water, at the skyline, at the whole enormous, indifferent world stretched out before us. Anywhere, she said. Everywhere. I don't know. That's kind of the point. I nodded slowly, and I said something that surprised even me. Then you should go. She blinked. What? You should go, I repeated. My voice was calm. I don't know where that calm came from. I genuinely don't. But it was real. It wasn't performed. It wasn't the rehearsed steadiness of a man trying to appear unbothered. It was the calm of a man who had just understood something fundamental about the situation he was standing in, something that had probably been true for a while, and was only now being named out loud between the two of them. Exploration should never be delayed, I said. If you delay it, it becomes regret. And I don't want to be someone's regret. She stared at me. I'm not saying that, she said quickly. I'm not calling you a regret. I love you. Nadia. She stopped. I hear you, I said. I really do. And I'm not angry. That part was true. What I felt in that moment was not anger. It was something more like grief, but a specific kind of grief, the kind that comes not from shock, but from recognition, from realizing that something you had been quietly sensing for months had just finally stepped into the light and introduced itself properly. We stood there by the water for a long time. Neither of us said much. At some point, she looped her arm through mine again, and we walked back to the hotel in a silence that had changed completely in character from the silence we'd walked out in. Going out, it had been the comfortable silence of two people who know each other well. Coming back, it was the fragile silence of two people trying to figure out what they are to each other now. We got back to the room. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. I stood near the window and looked at the city. I don't want to hurt you, she said. I know. I don't want to throw away what we have. I know that too. But you're not going to pretend this is nothing, are you? She asked. You're not going to just say, let's not talk about it, and go to sleep. I turned from the window. No, I said. I'm not going to do that. What followed was the kind of conversation that takes hours and covers everything and resolves nothing in the moment. She talked about feeling invisible inside the structure of our life together. And I want to be clear here, because I know how that sounds. It wasn't that I had mistreated her. She said that herself multiple times. "You've been good to me," she said, around the 2-hour mark, both of us sitting on opposite ends of the same couch, cold cups of tea between us. "This isn't about anything you did or didn't do. It's about something in me. Something in you that existed before you said yes to me?" I asked. A pause. "Yes," she admitted. Another pause. "And you said yes anyway." It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact, placed quietly on the table between us. She didn't deny it. "I thought it would pass," she said. "I thought once we were actually planning the wedding, once it became real, that feeling would just dissolve. Like it was just nerves or immaturity or something I'd grown out of. But it didn't dissolve." "No," she said. "It got louder." I asked her one question that night that I genuinely needed the answer to. "Is there someone else?" She met my eyes. "No," she said. "There's no one else. I promise you that." And I believed her. Not because I'm naive. I've been wrong about people before. I've trusted the wrong words at the wrong time. I know how deception works. But I believed her because the thing she was describing didn't have the shape of an affair. It had the shape of something older and quieter than that. An affair is directional. It has a destination, a person, a pull towards something specific. What Nadia was describing was undirected. She didn't want someone else. She wanted elsewhere. And that, in some ways, was harder to argue with. You can compete with a person. You cannot compete with an abstraction. You cannot compete with the entire open world. I slept on the couch that night. Not because either of us declared it. It just happened organically, both of us retreating to our corners of the room, the unspoken agreement that sharing a bed felt like it would require a position on things we hadn't yet taken. I didn't sleep much. I lay there in the dark and did the thing I always do when I'm processing something difficult. I played it backward. I went through the last 3 years in my mind, scene by scene, looking for the moments I had glossed over. The time, about 8 months after we started dating, when she had come home from a colleague's travel photos on social media. This colleague had quit her job and spent 5 months in South America, and Nadia had been unusually quiet for the rest of the evening. I'd asked her about it. She'd said, "Nothing, just tired." I let it go. The time, maybe a year into our relationship, when she had sat across from me at dinner and said, out of nowhere, "Do you ever feel like we got serious too fast?" I had laughed, gently, not dismissively, and said, "We took 2 years to even define things, so I think we're fine." She had smiled. Dropped it. I let it go. The time, just 6 weeks before Istanbul, when she had stood in our half-decorated future apartment, the one we were moving into together after the wedding, staring at the wall where her framed travel photos were going to hang, and she had said, very quietly, "I wonder sometimes what it would have been like to just take off somewhere for a year." "We can travel," I'd said. "We travel plenty." "That's not the same thing," she'd said. And then, almost immediately, she brightened and asked me what I thought about paint colors, and I had followed the topic shift like a man who was relieved to be on familiar ground. I had let it go. 3 times. Probably more. Lying on that hotel couch in Istanbul, I understood something clearly. She had been trying to tell me for a long time. Not loudly. Not with the explicit words she'd used that evening. But she had been leaving breadcrumbs, and I had been choosing not to follow them, because following them would have meant arriving somewhere I didn't want to arrive. That's not blame. That's just honesty. She had avoided the full truth because she loved me and didn't want to damage us. I had avoided hearing the full truth because I loved her and didn't want to face it. And so we had both been very kind to each other and very unkind to each other at the same time, for longer than either of us had admitted. The next morning, I woke before she did. I made coffee from the little machine in the corner of the room, and I sat by the window and watched Istanbul wake up, the ferry crossing the strait, the mosques turning gold in the early light, the city somehow managing to be both ancient and immediately present, the way only a handful of cities in the world can manage. I thought about what I was going to do. Not what I wanted her to do. Not what I wanted us to do. What I was going to do. Because that, I realized, was the only thing that was actually within my control. And by the time she stirred and came out to find me sitting with my coffee, I had reached a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a punishing one. Just a clear one. "I'm going to go home," I told her. She was wrapped in the hotel robe, her hair loose, a mug of tea in both hands. She looked at me carefully. What do you mean? I mean, I'm going to change my flight and go home early, I said. Today if I can. Tomorrow at the latest. We have 6 more days here. I know. You're leaving? Yes. She set her mug down on the table. Are you angry at me? She asked. No. Then why? Because, I said, staying here and pretending that last night didn't happen, or that we can just sightsee our way through it, would be dishonest. And I'm done with dishonesty. Even the gentle, well-meaning kind. She looked like she might cry. What does this mean for us? And here is where I said the thing that would define everything that came after. I think you already know what it means, I said. And I think you've known for a while. Last night you were brave enough to say it out loud. I'm going to honor that bravery by not asking you to walk it back. The silence that followed that was very different from all the silences before it. This one had weight. The particular weight of a thing that has been decided. She didn't argue. She didn't push back. She didn't say no. Wait, that's not what I meant. She sat with it. And the fact that she sat with it, rather than fighting it, rather than grabbing my arm and saying, please don't do this, told me more than anything she had said in the previous 12 hours. Because when someone truly wants to keep you, they fight to keep you. They don't sit quietly and watch you pack. I booked a flight for the following morning. We spent the rest of that day in the hotel, mostly apart. She went out for a walk in the afternoon. I stayed in and made some calls I hadn't expected to be making on this trip. My best friend Felix picked up on the second ring. I told him the short version. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Are you okay? I will be, I said. Do you want me to come get you from the airport? Yes, I said. Please. That night, we had dinner together. One last meal in Istanbul, at a small place around the corner from the hotel, overlooking the water. It should have been romantic. It was something else instead, something harder to name. Not hostile, not cold, but clear. The way the air is clear right after a storm passes. We talked about small things mostly, the food, the city, things we had seen on the trip before everything changed. And then, toward the end, she looked at me across the table and said, I'm sorry. Don't be. I said, You were honest. That matters. I should have been honest sooner. Yes, I agreed. But you told me. That's what I'm taking from this. She looked like she wanted to say more. She looked like there were 3 or 4 different things stacked up behind her eyes, each of them wanting to be the one that came out first. But she just nodded. And we paid the bill. And we walked back to the hotel under a sky full of stars, in a city that doesn't belong to either of us, which somehow made everything easier and harder at the same time. I left the next morning. She came down to the lobby with me. We stood there by the door with my bag between us, and she hugged me. The long, tight kind of hug that people give when they're trying to hold on to something they know they're letting go of. I hugged her back. Take care of yourself, I said into her hair. You too, she said. And then I got into the cab, and the cab pulled out into Istanbul traffic, and I watched the city move past the window, the bridges, the minarets, the water, and I felt the very specific feeling of a chapter ending. Not the soft kind, where pages gradually thin out and the story winds down gently. The sharp kind, where someone cuts right through the binding. Felix was at the airport when I landed. He didn't say much. He just drove me home, helped me bring my bag upstairs, made us both a coffee, and sat across from me at my kitchen table like he was settling in for however long this was going to take. Tell me, he said. So I told him. All of it. The walk by the Bosphorus. The conversation until 2 in the morning. The couch. The decision. The departure. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued most about Felix, that ability to just listen, without reaching for the nearest available opinion. When I finished, he said, You did the right thing. I know, I said. That doesn't make it easier. No, I said. It really doesn't. The next few weeks were, to put it plainly, hard. Not catastrophically hard. Not the kind of hard that breaks a person, but the grinding, daily kind of hard. The kind where you wake up in the morning and the first 3 seconds are fine, and then your brain catches up and hands you the whole situation again, and you have to find a way to carry it through another day. The practical things were almost worse than the emotional ones. Calling the venue, calling the florist, calling my parents. My mother cried. My father, the man with the speech, the carefully crafted speech he had read to me over the phone, laughing at his own jokes, went very quiet and then said, carefully, Are you certain about this? Yes, I told him. Another quiet moment. Then we support you, he said. That was it. No interrogation. No pressure. Just, then we support you. I have thought about those 4 words many times since. Nadia and I texted a few times in the first weeks. Careful texts. The kind written by two people trying not to wound each other further. She was still in Istanbul. She had extended her stay. Then she flew to Athens. Then, based on her social media, which I checked twice before deciding I needed to stop checking, to somewhere on the Aegean coast. She was doing the thing she had described on that waterfront. Just being somewhere with no one to answer to. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing when I saw those photos. The first one hit me like a fist. She was sitting at a table outside, somewhere white and blue, the kind of place that looks like it was designed specifically to make people feel like they are finally, really alive, and she looked luminous. Happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way that I couldn't honestly say I'd seen from her in months. And I sat with that for a while. I sat with the complicated feeling of watching someone be happy because they left you. Because the honest truth is, that's not simple. That is not a simple thing to witness. But here's the other thing I did in those weeks. I reorganized. Not just emotionally, practically, completely, structurally. I had been living my life around a future I'd assumed for nearly 3 years. The apartment. The timeline. The merged finances we've been slowly building toward. The joint decisions. Where to live. What career moves made sense for us. When to think about a family. All of it filtered through the lens of we. That lens was gone now. And for about 2 weeks, without it, I felt genuinely disoriented. Like someone had removed a wall from a building I'd been navigating in the dark, and I kept reaching for it and finding nothing. But then something shifted. Around the 3rd week back, I woke up one morning, and instead of reaching for the weight of it, I just didn't. I made coffee. I sat at my own table, in my own space, with my own morning. And I thought, what do I actually want? Not what do we want? Not what makes sense for the plan. What do I want? And I realized, with a clarity that surprised me, that I didn't actually know. I had been so deep inside the architecture of us for so long that my own wants had gotten a little blurry at the edges. So I started paying attention to them. I had been offered a position, a senior role at a firm in a different city, almost 8 months earlier. I had turned it down. Nadia was established where we were. Her work was there. Her friendships, her routines, her whole life was rooted in that city. Moving would have upended everything. So I had said no, professionally, graciously, and filed it away under decisions made for us. Now, in the 4th week after Istanbul, I reached out to the firm. Just to inquire. Just to see if the door was still open. It was. Not the same role. That had been filled long ago, but a different one. A slightly bigger one, actually. We had 3 conversations over 2 weeks. At the end of the 3rd, I was offered the position. I accepted it on a Thursday afternoon, sitting at that same kitchen table where Felix had listened to me process Istanbul, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not joy exactly, but its neighbor. The quiet satisfaction of a life that was becoming, again, entirely its own. I called my father to tell him. He was pleased, genuinely pleased, in the way parents are when they can see you finding your footing. New city, he said. New city, I confirmed. Good, he said. Simple as that. My mother asked if I needed help moving. I said yes. And that was it. 31 years old, disassembling one future, beginning to build another. It was not the story I had expected to be writing, but I was writing it, line by line, and it was mine. I moved 6 weeks after Istanbul. The city I moved to was different from the one I left in almost every way. Bigger, louder, more anonymous, the kind of place where you can be nobody for a while, which is exactly what I needed. I found an apartment, smaller than the one Nadia and I had half moved into together, but mine. I furnished it slowly, deliberately, one piece at a time, which is not something I had ever done before. I put up exactly 2 things on the walls in the first month. A photograph I had taken years ago, a mountain range at dawn, somewhere I had hiked alone before I met her, and a print I found in a market near my new office, a simple geometric design in 3 colors that I couldn't explain the appeal of but kept returning to. That was it. Blank walls, 2 things that meant something to me. There's a freedom in sparseness that I hadn't understood before. Work was good, genuinely good, the kind of role where you go home tired in the way that feels like progress rather than depletion. I made colleagues. Some of them became, slowly, something approaching friends. There was a woman at work, Petra, mid-30s, recently back from 2 years working abroad, who I had lunch with occasionally, and who had a way of talking about life that was wry and direct and honest in a way I found deeply refreshing after months of careful, navigating conversations. One afternoon, Over bad canteen coffee, she asked me how long I'd been in the city. I told her, 3 months. Running toward or running away? She asked, without any judgment, just casual curiosity. I thought about it. I came because of a door that opened, I said. But it opened because another door closed. She nodded slowly. That's usually how it works, she said. I should tell you what happened with Nadia, because I know that's where you're waiting, and you deserve the full picture. We had stayed loosely in touch throughout all of this. The texts had dwindled to occasional check-ins, a message here and there, nothing heavy, the kind of low-frequency contact that two people maintain when they've loved each other and don't quite know the protocol for going entirely silent. About 4 months after Istanbul, I received a longer message from her. She had been to 6 countries. She had solo traveled through Greece, Croatia, Portugal, Morocco, a brief loop through the south of France. She had found work she could do remotely, a freelance arrangement with her old company that let her stay mobile. She sounded, in the message, lighter than she had in the last year of our relationship. At the end of the message, she wrote, I hope you know that none of this was your fault. I hope you found something good. You deserve something good. I read it twice. Then I wrote back, I'm glad you're living the chapter you needed. I've landed somewhere that's working. Take care of yourself. Short, true, sufficient. I sent it, and then put my phone face down on the table and went back to what I was doing. The months continued. New city, new work, new rhythms. I started running again, something I had let slide in the last year of the engagement. I read more than I had in years. I started cooking properly, not just eating, which sounds like a small thing, but is actually not a small thing at all. There is something grounding and honest about cooking for yourself, about being the person who decides what your table looks like at the end of the day. Felix visited twice. The second time, he sat in my apartment and looked around at the bare walls and the 2 meaningful things and the neatly ordered bookshelves and said, You seem like yourself. I feel like myself, I said. I miss this version of you, he said. I thought about that for a while after he left, because the honest implication of what he'd said was that there had been a version of me, in the latter part of the engagement, maybe in the year before Istanbul, that had been slightly less this, slightly dimmer, slightly more muted, and I couldn't honestly argue with it. There is something I want to address directly, because I've thought about it many times since. There will be people who read this and say, she didn't deserve your kindness, that she used you, that she took 3 years of your life and a venue deposit and your father's speech, and then decided she wanted something else, and you let her off too easy. I understand that reading. I do not share it. Because the thing about Nadia, the thing that I have had to sit with, honestly, without softening or embellishing, is that she was not a villain. She was a person who had made a commitment she wasn't fully ready for, out of love and out of hope that the readiness would come, and it hadn't come, and she had tried for a long time to manage that quietly, and eventually it had outgrown her ability to contain it. That is not a crime. That is not even unusual. It is just painful. Painful for her. I genuinely believe it was painful for her. Painful for me. Obviously, evidently, as I have just described in some detail. And the only thing that would have made it worse, on either side, is if she had stayed silent and married me anyway. Imagine that version. A wedding, a life, a slow accumulation of quiet resentment. Hers, toward a future she never truly chose. Mine, toward the growing distance of a woman who was present in body but absent in some essential way. The Istanbul conversation was brutal. That alternative would have been much worse. About 7 months after Istanbul, I had a conversation with a colleague, one of the friends I'd made at the new firm, a man named Tobias who had been through a divorce 2 years before and had a very particular understanding of what it felt like to rebuild. We were having a drink after work, and I told him the whole story. He listened carefully. Then he said, What did you learn about yourself? Not what did you learn about her? Not what would you do differently? What did you learn about yourself? And I sat with that question because I didn't want to answer it quickly. Finally, I said, I learned that I am better at accepting hard truths than I thought I was, and worse at noticing them early. Tobias nodded. That's a good answer, he said. Most people only get one of those. The thing about Istanbul that I still think about, the thing that I don't think I'll ever fully shake, is not the conversation. It's the moment just before it. I was holding her hand. We were walking along the waterfront in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. We were 11 months from our wedding. And I remember, in the seconds just before she spoke, feeling a very specific kind of happiness. The happiness of someone who believes they know exactly where they are going and is glad about it and feels no particular need to question it. That feeling is gone now, and I want to be precise about this. I am not saying the loss of that feeling is the tragedy. I'm saying that the feeling was never actually accurate. The happiness I felt was real, but it was built on a foundation that was not as solid as I had believed, and I simply had not looked at the foundation closely enough. Istanbul did not break us. Istanbul just turned the lights on. About 9 months after Istanbul, she called. Not texted, called. I almost didn't pick up. Not because I was angry. I wasn't, not anymore, not really. But because I had worked very deliberately to build some distance between that chapter and this one, and a phone call from her was the kind of thing that could erase a lot of that distance very quickly. I picked up on the 4th ring. Hi, she said. Hi. A pause. How are you, she asked. Good, I said. Actually good. I can't hear that, she said. Another pause. I'm back, she said. I've been back for a few weeks. I processed that. Where are you now? I asked. She named our old city. Her city. How was it? I asked. The whole thing. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is actively full, where someone is choosing between several different true things to say. It was everything I needed, she said finally. And it also showed me some things I hadn't expected. Like what? I asked. Like the difference between freedom and loneliness, she said. They look alike at the start. I didn't say anything to that immediately, because there was something in the way she said it, the weight of it, the fact that she was choosing to say that to me, specifically, on a phone call she had chosen to make, that required careful handling. She was telling me something. The question was whether she was telling me she'd made a mistake, or whether she was telling me she'd learned something. There is a difference, and the difference matters. I'm glad you went, I said, after a moment. I mean that. I know you do, she said. That's almost the hardest part. What do you mean? You were never the thing I was running from, she said. I think I always knew that, but I needed to run anyway, to figure out what I actually was running from. And what was it? I asked. Myself, mostly, she said quietly. Some version of myself that I was afraid would disappear if I committed too quickly. But the thing is, a pause. She was already gone by the time I looked up. There was a lot of space in what she was saying, and I am not someone who fills space carelessly. So I let it sit between us. I let it have its full weight. And then I said something that I had thought about many times in the previous months, something I had needed to arrive at slowly, on my own terms, through my own process. I think some journeys, I said carefully, are necessary to take, even when the cost is real, even when they permanently change the geography between two people. She was quiet. Permanently, she repeated softly. Yes, I said. I think so. Another long pause. You're somewhere new, she said. I am. Is it good? Yes, I said. It's genuinely good. She exhaled, a slow, soft breath. I'm glad, she said. And I believe that too. We stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes. We talked about small things, neutral things, her family, my new city, a restaurant she had loved in Lisbon, a book I had recently finished. When we said goodbye, it felt like a real goodbye. Not the goodbye of two people who expect to speak again next week. The goodbye of two people who have reached the end of a shared road, stood at the place where it forks, and acknowledged it honestly. Take care of yourself, I said. You too, she said. And this time, when I heard those words, they landed differently than they had in that Istanbul hotel lobby. In the hotel, they had been the words of two people still attached to each other, speaking across the beginning of a separation. This time, they were the words of two people who had completed something, who had given each other what they could, who were, now, genuinely wishing the other person well from the far side of a chapter that had closed. I want to tell you what Istanbul looked like from the cab on the way to the airport, because I've been back to it, in my mind, many times. The city in early morning is different from the city at any other time. The light is softer. The noise is just beginning. Not the full chaos of midday, but the first sounds of a place waking up, the distant call to prayer, the engines of ferries beginning their first crossings, the clatter of a market being set up somewhere off a side street. I watched all of it from the cab window, and I remember thinking, this city will still be here. The Bosphorus will keep moving. The ferries will keep crossing. The light will keep doing that thing it does in the morning over old stone and water. And two people who once walked these streets holding hands, who had once looked at this water and thought they were looking at their future, will have become simply two people who once visited Istanbul, who each, separately, went home, who each, in their own way, kept going. I am not writing this to cast her as a villain. I said that before, and I mean it, and I want to say it again clearly. Nadia was not a villain. She was a person who needed something she hadn't figured out how to ask for. And then one evening, on a waterfront in a city that does something to people, that opens things up in them, somehow, the way Istanbul does, she finally found the words. And because she did, I was able to find mine. And because I was able to find mine, I was able to go home and reorganize my entire life around what I actually wanted, rather than around a future I had assumed. And the life I am living now, quieter than the one I'd planned, smaller in some ways, larger in others, is more genuinely mine than anything I had before. That is a strange and uncomfortable truth, but it is a truth. There is a version of this story where I am the victim, where I was wronged, where years were taken from me, where I was left standing at an altar with flowers ordered and a father's speech ready and nothing to show for it. That version is available. Some people will read this and tell me that's the real version, but I don't live in that version. I live in the version where a woman I loved was honest with me, more honest, in that one moment on that waterfront, than she had managed to be for months, and I respected her honesty enough to act on it. Where I chose not to negotiate against her for a life she had already mentally left. Where I went home and reorganized, and found out who I was without the architecture of us around me. Where the door that closed opened a different one. Where the journey that ended mine was, ultimately, the beginning of another one. I still think about Istanbul, more than I'd expected to, honestly. Not always with sadness, sometimes just with that particular quality of memory that has been processed, that has been turned over enough times that it no longer cuts you, but still has weight. The cobblestones, the amber light, the fairies on the Bosphorus, her hand in mine, just before she pulled it away. I feel like I haven't truly lived yet. She was right. She hadn't. And I had been standing there beside her, willing to let her not live, in order to keep her. And the kindest thing I ever did for her, maybe the bravest thing either of us did, was to let that sentence land, and honor it, and say, then go. Because the alternative was a marriage built around someone's unfulfilled life. And some journeys, as I have come to understand, are non-negotiable. Some people need to take them. And when they do, when someone you love steps forward into the open world and tells you they can't stay, you can either fight for possession of a person who is already halfway out the door, or you can let them go with dignity and turn around and figure out who you are when you're standing on your own ground. I turned around. I figured it out. And the version of me that exists now, in this new city, in this spare and deliberately chosen life, is someone I would not trade back. Not even for the waterfront. Not even for the amber light. Not even for the feeling, in those last few seconds before she spoke, of believing you know exactly where you are going. Some doors close so that others can open. Some separations are not failures. Some goodbyes are the most honest thing two people ever say to each other. And some journeys, the ones that begin with a single, quiet sentence on a waterfront at dusk, do not end where you expected. They end somewhere true. And that, in the end, is more than enough.